food's good. It's very hearty. All right, everybody. So let me begin, and I'll try. So I'll try to not do this with an extraordinary degree of detail, as I usually do, and and so more often this one than not. Let me turn this off. We'll get interrupted, and we'll go from there. And you see this is where we were, and then we were getting into these layers that were there: the mucosa, the submucosa, etc. And the first, and really, this to me is the critical stuff. Look, everybody, whether I told you or I didn't tell you, I never remember because I teach the same material to a lot of different classes, and I go over the same thing again next year. I mean, this is I have an inherently strong understanding, having come through two major gastrointestinal bypass surgeries. I've had major stomach surgery, not once, but twice in a 7-year span. First in December of 93, and subsequently in June of 2000, so that's 6.5 years later. Both of those surgeries took 8 hours. I was in a hospital for a sustained period of time. I told you about all the blood transfusions. They were prior to and immediately leading up to the second of those major surgeries. I had terrible bleeding ulcers. So, I mean, this is all stuff I'm familiar with, not just on an academic or a teaching level or a clinical level, but on an actual level. So, I mean, that's sort of the jumping off point to understand why enthusiastic is the wrong word. Maybe passionate is probably the wrong word, but interested in sharing about it is the right attitude to take. So that's the introduction. So here's the same thing. Okay, so we looked at this mucosa level. This is where everything happens. Absorb it from a standpoint of digestion and absorption and processing. The critical pieces involve these cells that are subject to so many chemicals and so much trauma. They're just getting beat up with food passing over them constantly. We're replacing them every 3 to 6 days in the entirety. They shed constantly. So it's a certain amount of good news and bad news. But the good news is they're replaced very, very rapidly. The bad news is if they err on the wrong side, they can get irritated and you can lose some of them. And that's, when we talk about ulcerations, it has a lot to do with a multiplicity of reasons why bad things happen and they don't get replaced, and it exposes the underneath, and that just can't put up all the chemical onslaught. Pardon me, or the physical onslaught. This submucosal layer it's dedicated to support of this interesting triple mucosal layer. You can see the glands, and glands typically are in lower layers with a lot of supportive tissue, so they penetrate down to their additional lymphatics, blood vessels, and the interesting thing, nerves. So you can see some nerves here on the exterior of this submucosal layer, and nerves here on the exterior of what we'll get to called the muscularis externa, the smooth muscles that do the peristalsis and the segmentation. What's fascinating about that, just gotta check one thing. I gotta make sure I started. I did. What's fascinating about that is they call that submucosal and myenteric, meaning having to do with the muscles, nerve plexes. It controls itself. You don't need any external nerve supply to make this work. Again, it's stretch receptors and chemical receptors that basically ascertain if something's coming or going. Is it stretching it a lot or stretching it a little? And it controls it by itself. And I am living proof of that, because not once but twice they cut the major nerve supply to my stomach, which comes from something we learned about earlier called the vagus nerve. I have what's called a vagectomy. So to cut down on acid production, which the vagus stimulates, they lopped out a chunk. When you ectomize, you take out a section, so the ends don't grow back together. Did it twice. Okay? And so, and again, everything still works. As well, probably not, but still works. So here you have the submucosa, not enough to say. Here are the standard two layers. Remember this, inner circular, outer longitudinal. That's how peristalsis. And then the exterior, almost all of the areas that are not retroperitoneal consist of what's called serosa. The lungs and the heart are covered by that. That's the lining tissue that's inherently moist, designed to move, to rub against one another without friction. Which you'll see when we look at the esophagus, which is buried behind your trachea. If anything, what moves away is the trachea, not the esophagus. So that's called adventitia. Adventitia is like firmer connective tissue, not moist. So it kind of holds things better in place. Yeah. Over the last 25 years, I've been teaching people about this. I've tried to come up with ways to explain it to you in the hopes that you, for whatever reason, you retain it. Look, if you get where you're going, I'm delighted. Nothing, people in academics, the biggest thing about success is your success. We sit there and, oh, we have somebody in this school. Somebody went to Cornell. Somebody went to Michigan State. Somebody got a PhD at Pitt. Whatever. Okay? That's what excites us. What percentage of people have gotten their careers successful? It's a big deal. So we kind of really are driven by that. That's the way I want you to understand it. Okay? It may not be that way with everybody. I think it should be, but that's me. How's things going with the math thing? SOP, same old stuff. SOS, same old.
We just took a quiz.
What? Pardon me?
We all took a quiz just now. Now we have to do homework from there.
I don't see bright smiling faces. What was it in? Other than math, give me a break.
I don't even know. I don't even remember what it was called.
And you're a good student. We think.
Sometimes.
Not today. What was the topic?
Wait.
This is terrible. Talk about putting it out of your mind.
Yeah, I hate that class.
I know.
I know I have English market better.
Oh, okay.
Stuff like that.
So it was statistical and things like that, or
Yeah.
standard deviations from the mean and that kind of.
Yeah, kind of.
That kind of.
Like confidence intervals.
Pardon me?
Confidence intervals.
Okay, confidence. Okay,
Yeah,
so that's
that
statistics.
stuff.
Okay. All right. The reason you learn about that has more to do with understanding what research tells you. So that you understand whether something is correct or not from a research perspective. So oh, here's an article we need you to read so you can understand what they're talking about. Okay? Because when it comes, if it's statistics, statistics are about one thing. Did whatever happened occur by random chance? Was it just luck that you got this result? Or we can really prove that it was significant? That's the way I look at it. Yeah, that's why I don't do research. I love math. Key to the universe. You don't know where that quote comes from. A very offbeat movie with Christopher Walken from 1996 called The Prophecy. Oh, watch that. That's weird. That's really weird. It's from the mind of the man who invented the Highlander movie and the Highlander series. Who was a UCLA film student. He did that when he was a student. Interestingly enough. All right, moving on. So let me go over these. Submucosa support, blood and lymphatics, more lymph follicles. I mean, you have a lot of invaders, so you have a lot of lymphatics here. The gut, a lot of people, when they get chronic gut infections, they get something called mesenteric adenitis. So the lymph follicles are located in the mesentery. They get inflamed. It will double people over almost like appendicitis. And because sometimes it's just global. My eldest had that, and thankfully they didn't take out his appendix because that would have been what a lot of people would have sort of knee-jerk done. Turned out it was just that. If anything, it was being fed from his tonsils that were infected. Tonsils eventually went. So, and the other thing about this is elastic tissue. Understand whether it's the stomach or the small. Sometimes it gets large, sometimes it gets small. You're going to see in your stomach, normally, when it's flat, when it's empty, it's got a volume of about 1.5 ounces. When it's filled, it can go to a gallon. Okay, so you go and have, like, you were doing the ultimate Thanksgiving meal. Everybody's got 48 things they have to try, which I am willing to do. So I don't want to offend any of the relatives. Hello over there. You guys are doing something else, aren't you? Admit.
No, I'm actually looking at my grade for the last quiz.
Thank you. I know I tried to go lower, but I couldn't. I'm joking. I was trying to make your grade worse.
No.
Hey, I give up. Just shut up. Nobody cares about your silly jokes. So the stomach can stretch ridiculously. So that's why I've had half my stomach removed, not once, but twice. So the maximum volume is about a quart, but when it's just like but it can still expand from being relatively. That's the elastic, and it retains its shape for the most part. When you hear about someone having, and they do it less now than they used to, bariatric surgery, they staple your stomach, quote unquote, because people were very, very overweight. It's almost like they cinch the stomach to stop it from stretching. And there's been a lot of problems over the years that I had several folks I treated who had that surgery because a lot of people with foot and leg problems, the weight played a big role in a lot of that stuff. So here's again the external layer is about peristalsis. When you hear the term sphincter, it's a valve. It's not like the heart valves or blood vessel valves. They're just thickenings. The muscles get thick and the edges come together on the inside and basically block stuff from going in. So it's not a lock and key. It's not cup-like fragments like in the blood vessels of the heart. Anything like that. And here's the serosa, and again, adventitia in areas where it's more firmly held. Okay, and when it's retroperitoneal, it's a little bit above, but that's not a big deal. So the circulation we already went over. It's got a fancy name, splanchnic. Don't know why it has that name. The hepatic portal. Again, all of the blood from the stomach, small and large intestine, goes back by way of the liver. That's all it means. So it can be processed. Your liver is a big deal. We will not get to it today. It is a big deal. We underestimate the importance of the liver. And in modern times, people are because the livers can go bad. And when they do, you're in big trouble. Big trouble. So, I mean, it's the type of thing. And I told this anecdote to my class, because we're doing the same unit in my advanced anatomy class yesterday. And my cousin, who's about 2 years younger than I, my dad's brother's oldest of the two kids. Unfortunately, the younger one, he died relatively young. But she married roughly about age 23, so maybe a little older than you are. By the time she was 28, she had 2 boys and was expecting a third. Turned out to be another boy. Her husband, she'd been dating a guy since she was 19, high school sweethearts, that type of stuff. They found out when he was about that age, 23, 24, he had some kind of liver disease, not an infection. Nobody even, the words HIV were not even defined. So it was nothing like that. It wasn't some type of thing that he picked up that was sexually transmitted. He had a faulty liver. He died at age 28 while she was still pregnant. And I had just got off the phone with her, lived in New Jersey where we all came from, knowing that I was out here, asked me about Pittsburgh because he'd just gotten on transplant list. That was right around the time Dr. Starzl came from Denver and basically made the University of Pittsburgh into the biggest transplant center in the country. basically it became the largest transplant center. So he was a major, it's called the Starzl Institute now. I think he retired and I think he died about age 90. You know, so he was a major player. She's calling me and you know, saying they're optimistic they might be able to get him a liver, and then I get a notice. He didn't make it because they had to have them wait at that time. Some type of, she was asking me about housing, how to get here, and you know, support systems. Very sick. Think the good thing is, even though it's a bad thing, she married a really nice guy. I mean, who just took great care of those kids. Really took those kids as his own. So this is its nervous system. They've given it a fancy name, gut brain, because it works by itself. All you have to know. So you don't have to go into this. All the reflexes don't go have to get. That's all. I do this in advanced physiology, and I don't do a whole lot else. Most of it is by itself. That's the take-home point. You don't really have to do a lot to worry about it. It has reflex systems. I get stretch receptors and chemical receptors. As soon as food enters, not only does it cause movement, but it tells other cells in the stomach or in the small or in the large intestine to get busy. It's like, hey, we got company. Get busy. And it starts generating hormones, localized chemicals that don't go all through the bloodstream, like hormones that are made in the small intestine that activate the small intestine, hormones that are made in the stomach that activate the stomach. That's the neat thing about this particular system. So, stuff I don't do. Not going to do the mouth again. Not going to show you taste buds or the tongue. Okay. I'll cover the salivary glands. They're important. Glands are things where things go wrong, and I don't do. And I don't want to do it right because I got a particularly big bill from the dentist for my wife. Dental insurance, our dental insurance doesn't pay a whole lot. I was unhappy. My wife goes there, pardon me for saying this, she can't believe how handsome he is. I'm sorry. She was just getting over Tom Brady and Jimmy Garoppolo. She's talking. He goes, oh, he just got married. My wife's like, again, she has clothes older than him. A lovely guy, really nice guy. So, see what I got to put up with? So we're not doing any of that stuff, lips or labia, who cares? The buccinator, the muscles, your cheek muscles, you might learn about them in AP1. The frenulum, there's two, one for the lip, the labial, and one for the tongue. A little bit, sometimes you have to snip because people, it's too short. They quote unquote tongue tied, but it's, and they tell you about it here, it's who cares. And the palate, don't care. It's arched in such a way, you all know, kind of have an idea what the inside of your mouth is. It's just sort of, and it really is more of an adaptation, I think, for assisting with the chewing, grinding, you know, the process that we hardly give it a second thought. All these like archways. That's the uvula. I have no idea what it does. When it gets inflamed or infected, it's a problem. Frenulum here. And I'm not going to ask you a blessed question about it. Okay, don't care. Not going back to the taste buds, don't care. Taste buds, they're just, it's just part of it. We covered in special senses in classic anatomy, in graduate or medical school anatomy. We go through all this nonsense. You know, it's there. And think of it, to us, it's part of a process. I don't get excited about it. It's tough. Saliva is important. Saliva is more immunologically important in a lot of ways. It's a wetting agent. It moistens the food. Understand that the mouth and the stomach are almost exclusively about mechanical digestion, or chewing, or compacting, or grinding. There's a little bit of chemical that starts here. It starts from the tongue and from saliva. When you put a carb, piece of bread, a bun from a burger, whatever, it starts to dissolve right away. We have something called salivary amylase. Proteins aren't touched yet. We also have from that's from the salivary glands. We also have something called lingual lipase. Lipase means fats. So we start to break down fats very early stages from your tongue. That's the only thing, that's the slightest amount of chemical digestion. So have you ever noticed that, even at the end of, like, take a bite of a sandwich, at the end of it, kind of looks different. It's some of that, those enzymes and the moisture. Saliva is very hypotonic, pushes moisture in. It's got a lot of defensive stuff and antimicrobial stuff and chemicals in it. It's very, very useful. That's why it's so important. And it does play a role. I'll do a little teeth in dental stuff. There's a lot involved with that. Like in micro, we talk about cavity-causing bacteria and dental tartar. Dental tartar, you'll learn, is what it's called a slime layer. Okay, which is a colony of multiple different. That's why they'll tell you it's more important to floss and get rid of the tartar than worrying necessarily about brushing. My mom was fastidious about nuts. Her sole idea, and she died lovely at the age of 93, was to keep all of her hair and all of her teeth. I may have told you. So we'd be at a wonderful restaurant. She'd have dinner. She'd go, "I'll be right back. I have to floss." She's one of those. Didn't I tell you that story? She's the same lady. You have grandmothers who did this. They had the standing appointment at 10 o'clock on Friday at the beauty parlor. She lived in Rochester, New York, the last 15 years of her life. She drove till she was 86. There could be a foot of snow. I'm going to. I'm getting money. I didn't tell you her birthday would be Saturday. Famous birthday. What's that day? November 11th. What's November 11th? What holiday? You're in trouble. What?
I said that's a holiday.
It's not a holiday like we get the day of school off. Do you ever hear the term Veterans Day? Bing, the light bulb. Ding, ding, ding. There it is. Light bulb going off. See that? Light bulb over your head? Best I could do on short notice. This fall. Props. Originally, that was called Armistice Day. You might be familiar with the story. The armistice, the end of World War I, the war to end all wars, was signed the 11th day of the 11th month at the 11th hour in a train, in a big car on a train in France, close to the German border. They signed the armistice, and the worst thing about the armistice is basically triggered World War II. That's all history. We're not doing history class. In this country, babies who were born on November 11th, 1918, were either, if they were boys, they were named Woodrow, because the president at the time was Woodrow Wilson, and they didn't have a girl's name, so they named them Victory. Her name, Ruth Victory Krumholtz. That's her maiden name, Krumholtz. How's that? So her lucky number was 11, because she was born 11/11. She'd play that at roulette. She'd play that at the racetrack. My mom liked to gamble. Okay. It's a Krumholtz trait. We have it. As a kid growing up, my friends would laugh. Lou, whenever you go over to your house, all you have to do is this, and we'll either get a deck of cards or an ashtray. Moving on. So amylase breaks down the starch. Okay, most of it comes from the salivary glands. This is the largest, the parotid. It's mostly serous, which is water. There's one here under your mandible called submandibular. Same thing. And the one under your tongue is called sublingual and makes more mucus. So this is where they are. You take a look at that. It's parotid, by far and away the largest. This is sublingual and this is submandibular. There's one on each side. They're really important and they play a big role in dental care. So that, there's a lot of association with salivary problems and people are more prone to cavities than others. So it's not all dental hygiene, though a lot of it is. Sure. And this is dry mouth. Dry mouth's a big problem with people on medications. A lot. Oral infections, meds, diabetes, AIDS. This is a very unique autoimmune disease, even though it affects all glands, and it's not innocent, because when it flares, you're really sick and weak. One of the most famous and one of the greatest athletes that we've seen, she and her sister were Serena and Venus Williams. This affected Venus Williams. Like, her career wasn't as long or as successful as her sister, who could certainly make the arguments this one. So I'm a particular Martina Navratilova fan, but that's just me. That would have been a good tennis match. And see, it's hypotonic, a little bit acidic, all sorts of chemicals, the lipase, the amylase. These are things, IgA, you might remember we talked about. It's in all body secretions, protects against infection, etc., etc. We even get rid of some waste products. It's good stuff. That's what you have to know without getting too much into the physiology. This is the teeth knowledge, and it's teeth are interesting, and I don't do it. It's just something you never. If you want to know about teeth, go to your dentist and ask some questions. That's what a lot of people are very interested in it. My wife's got great teeth. And to some extent, people spend a lot of money to have great teeth. My sister, big companies used to pay for orthodontia or help with it for children. That's pretty routine if you work for a big company. They used to do it for adults. My sister got her job with Bausch & Lomb. We didn't have enough money for orthodontia when we were kids. I had a spit spot. Front teeth were a little far apart. And she had it when she got hired there. Here's this 35-year-old woman wearing braces. Just saying. And I think that's everything that's of any relevance. This is the idea of the plaque. You'll learn about it in micro. Very interesting. Really plays a big role in dissolving and paving the way for the bacteria that cause cavities. And so I thought I would share that with you. A little bit here on these, and really there's not a lot that I want to cover here, but I thought we would get a good head start on this, since I normally would have done this and done the technology. But my computer is not off the hospital list. We did the pharynx for respiratory. We don't have to do it again. The big deal, swallowing is not peristalsis. When you swallow, the food is pushed down by the constrictors about 1/2 to 2/3 of the way. When it's about 2/3 of the way down the esophagus, it changes into peristalsis. There's a transition between skeletal muscle, the constrictors, and smooth muscle, which we find in the esophagus. And at that point, peristalsis takes over. It's flat. It doesn't move. It collapses. It fan folds on itself. You see a wonderful illustration. It's one of the three things that penetrates or passes through the diaphragm, the aorta, the inferior vena cava, and the other hole in the diaphragm that's filled is the esophagus. It's got a famous name. It's called the esophageal hiatus. When you hear about somebody who has, as they're older, they get a hiatal hernia. That's where that occurs. That's part of reflux disease, or a cause of it sometime, or indigestion, or whatever. There's a zillion names for it. Heartburn, all of those things. It's not exclusive to older. Babies are sometimes born with a fault in that area, and that has to be repaired. So it's nothing extraordinary. When you hear the term hernia, It has to do with the abdominal pelvic cavity. It means something is protruding through the peritoneum where it should be. It can go up through the diaphragm, hiatal hernia. It can go through the umbilicus. We usually see that after a difficult or a poorly delivered birth. That's called an umbilical hernia. It can be after surgery where you cut through, like I have, through the peritoneum. That is called an incisional hernia. And the one that most people have heard about is called a rupture, which is an inguinal hernia. It goes through the inguinal ligament. And it's painful in both men and women, but perhaps more so in men. My kid who used to do, not the one in the Navy, but my younger of the two boys, who's now 37, he used to do a lot of car work and industrial work. And I mean, he ended up with a double hernia. They had to put mesh in. The mesh is a real pain. There are a lot of problems over the years. So this is called the gastroesophageal, stomach and esophagus sphincter, or cardiac sphincter, because it's near the heart, and it gets its name because the entry point is the cardia near the heart of the stomach, as you will see. Okay, it's stratified squamous and abruptly changes to that simple columnar, the hallmark of digestive, at that location. Okay, again, mucus there, and again, the smooth muscle takes over about 2/3 to half to 2/3 of the way down. So you can see what it's like. It's folded over on itself. It's that neat thing that we see in anatomy, where when things can almost flatten out, they fold over, and they can expand when they're filled. So when you eat something, it stretches those things out, and we see that in a lot. This looks very much like the ureters, but it's a different kind of arrangement of the other structures. The ureters, Karen, when they fill with urine, when they're empty, they look like this. When they fill, they don't. It's that neat kind of folding over or pleating that we see all the time. You'll see it again in the stomach. So here's the abrupt transition. This is the esophagus, stratified squamous non-keratinizing. Here, it transitions to simple columnar. These are these gastric indentations we call pits, P-I-T-S. In the intestine, small intestine, we don't call them pits because they're called crypts, C-R-Y-P-T. Okay. Those intestinal crypts are so busy and active. And for those of you in the imaging and radiology aspect, those are the most frequently damaged cells from radiation acute. They're replaced. They're just go wild being replaced. You get that in. I'm doing the radiation biology online. If you still have to take it, but Tyler's taking it. Unlike you guys, I like him.
I'm better than Tyler.
I beg your pardon. All right. We'll have, we're going to sponsor a match. You're Youngstown. He's like Binghamton. Like, yeah, I know. Hey, New York Metropolitan Giant fan.
Yeah.
You're probably a Browns fan.
No, I'm serious.
Thank God. Oh, thank God. We go up your way to shop forever. Over there, what's that whole town that's filled with shopping everywhere next to Youngstown?
Portland?
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Cool.
Right, that's all.
All the time. 45 minutes. Oh my God. Moving on. So that's reflux disease. If you use the acronym GERD, if you want to use it, fine. Lots of things cause it. The hiatal hernia. The big problem with reflux disease is the acid. That acid comes up. Your esophagus can't deal with that. And if it isn't corrected, it doesn't have to be surgery. If it isn't treated, what happens? It causes ulcers, and this is why people get it. And esophageal cancer is another one of those cancers you don't want to get. Just like it's got a bad prognosis. There's something called esophageal varices, which are the blood vessels get exposed and they start to go, and that's a really bad situation. Fancy name for swallowing is deglutition. Who cares? There's a number of phases. Starts in the mouth, works its way down, and they'll show you these. They have a whole like laundry list, and basically it's just peristalsis, and that's what the sphincter looks like, just thickened muscles that keep it closed. And again, as they start to get, then it opens up, and it should just let a little bit pass through. But there's a lot of things that you saw before: alcohol, certain disease states, being overweight. All of those are things that lead to problems with it. Perhaps lastly for today, we'll look at the stomach. Just checking on something to make sure I don't. Okay, we're good. The stomach is really temporary storage, a great way to describe it. The whole idea, just like the mouth, the esophagus is just a passageway. It doesn't process anything. The mouth starts mechanical digestion, a little bit of chemical, and the same is true of the stomach. For lack of a better way to express it, it's a giant mixing bag. That's what it is. Okay, not a whole lot else. Okay, and what it does, the food is pulverized, subjected to acidity. As you can see, it can go from very small to very large. And when it's empty, as it fills, before it fills completely, those ridges have a great name. They're called rugae. We also see them in the bladder. You got to roll your R's. So stomachs have ridges, like ruffles have ridges. Potato chips. Oh, no fun. You people are no fun. So you're going to see the way the stomach appears. We'll go over the areas. The entryway, proximity to the heart, cardia. It goes up under the diaphragm. It's called the fundus. Dome-shaped areas anatomically. The uterus has a fundus. Okay, that's the dome-shaped area. And on either side of it are the entry points for the fallopian tubes. The body is the largest portion. That's where the mixing occurs. As it begins to narrow, okay, we call it the pyloric area. It starts wide and narrows. The entry point is the antrum. And it terminates in another sphincter, a narrowing called the pyloric valve or pyloric sphincter. And what has happened to that over the X number of hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, it has pulverized and basically changed the food and liquid. And the fancy name we call it is chyme. C-H-Y-M-E. Like in the lymph, we talked about chyle. Chyme is the old term for effectively the food. It's white, it's pasty, it's highly acidic, it's highly hypertonic. And when it's little tiny squirts of about a half a teaspoon shoot out, because if the whole thing came out, it would just clobber the small intestine, which is designed for alkalinity, not acidity. The stomach is designed for acidity because the mucus that it secretes both on top of the cells and to some extent under the cells, and an abundance of tight junctions so stuff doesn't seep through, is very, very alkaline. So the contents are still acidic, but the mucus neutralizes it. It's a very good illustration. Here we have a third layer. Yes, you have circular. Yes, you have longitudinal. This is the oblique layer, and what it does is it creates this over and back, a la an old style washboard over these rugae, these folds. And so it's just pulverizing that, clobbering the vast majority of any bacteria or microbes with hydrochloric acid, pH 1, pH 2, and eventually tiny squirts, even though it's not shown to scale there, it's kind of scooch out or spit out into this area, a very small amount, so they can be neutralized in the first part of the small intestine called the duodenum. It has a lesser curvature, and the liver is kind of attached to that by something called the lesser omentum. It's kind of an area that's similar to or part of visceral peritoneum, and it has a drape of greater omentum, which you don't see here, hanging down like an apron, like you'd be in the kitchen and you put like a waist apron on. Okay. Like an Iron Chef. My kids get me stuff like that. We all it's like you've all got, many of you got dads who like to sit out there by the barbecue and think they're like, we're like that. So it kind of comes down from here all the way down and kind of drapes over the small and the large intestine. It protects it from adhering to the outer wall. So it's really something that's important. When surgery, when we have something important, we carefully pull it apart. We call it reflecting it from one side to the other and preserve it. And then when it comes back, we gently put it back in place. Sometimes we'll put a few stitches in there to hold it. The whole idea. Yeah. So it kind of looks like this. Lesser, greater curvature here. Greater curvature, convex, lesser, concave. The lesser omentum to the liver, mesentery. The greater omentum is this drape over the intestine, spleen, part of the colon, etc. It basically, what makes the gastrointestinal tract busy is the autonomic nervous system, particularly the parasympathetic. What slows it down is the sympathetic. When you're in fight or flight, full sympathetic nervous system, basically there's minimal gastrointestinal or genitourinary activity. And when that gives up, then the parasympathetic by way of the vagus takes over. Again, we looked at the blood supply before. Again, same small tunics. Again, you have that extra oblique layer to move and mix and do this. It's almost all mechanical digestion. This is the first time where we start to break down proteins. You'll see that shortly. It's called pepsin. And there's a little bit of gastric lipase. So again, we're doing a little more with fats, not anything more with starches. So simple columnar, alkaline mucus, trapping bicarb, creating the alkalinity, tons of these, millions of these tiny pits that produce the gastric juice. This is what they look like. So it's almost though you had tons and tons of little passageways throughout the stomach that look like this. And I'll blow it up. It's easier to see it. This way. Here's the lining everywhere. These are the typical simple columnar with goblet cells. They give way as you enter into the pit, something called mucous neck cells. We still don't know what they do. As you get farther down, we start to see a different cell called a parietal cell. That's very important. That makes the hydrochloric acid. It also makes something called intrinsic factor, which you need to absorb vitamin B. And you got to have vitamin B12 for red cells to mature. Not everybody has that or may have enough of it. There's a disease called pernicious anemia because you don't. And so what you have to do is either get B12 shots or get B12 in your bloodstream differently. There's like a nasal gel you can use that'll get into the bloodstream. For my surgeries, I probably lost a little bit of intrinsic factor. I have to take like B12 chewies every day. And then farther down here, we have the chief cells. They make the pepsin. In the stomach, all the enzymes are made precursors. It's called pepsinogen. So it's inactive. It's activated by the hydrochloric acid. If it was made active here, it's a protein, what do you call it, proteolytic or a protein breaking up enzyme. It would destroy all this tissue. It's made out of proteins. Okay, your body is made, all those organs, all the stomach, it's made out of proteins. That's the big problem when something ruptures, enzymes come out, and they're indiscriminate. They don't. It's not. Oh, we're only doing digestive protein. If they encounter a protein, they attack it. That's the big problem with peritonitis. Boom, all these chemicals come out, and they're indiscriminate. They start tearing you up from the inside. That's why they have to be flushed out of neutral. You don't want that. Pancreatitis. My ex had a horrible case of pancreatitis, usually associated with alcohol. She very rarely. She had a tumor removed from behind her pancreas that, and when it was extirpated, when it was removed, it irritated the pancreas and started to leak. I've never seen someone so much. She came home from the hospital after the surgery, and a few days later it was like doubling over in pain, almost constant. We had to literally carry her back to the hospital. There's not a whole lot you can do other than time and painkillers and support. It's horrible. I mean, the poor woman is 100 pounds soaking wet. Very tough, very petite. Worse now. And at the bottom, there's something called an enteroendocrine cell. This is when the stomach is stretched, it triggers these cells to make an endocrine secretion that makes the stomach more active. So the neck cells don't know. Parietal cells make hydrochloric acid, intrinsic factor. We need the hydrochloric acid to activate the pepsin. And also it breaks down plant cell walls so we can get stuff out. We can't break down the cellulose, but we can get what's inside, basically the starches that are inside plants and the other things, vitamins and things like that. Okay, bacteria. This is the glycoprotein for B12, so it carries on to the small intestine. The pepsinogen is made by the chief cells as well as these lipases. And the enteroendocrine cells make serotonin and histamine. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter, but in the bloodstream or in the gastrointestinal tract, histamine is the same thing. It's a neurotransmitter, obviously plays a pivotal role in allergies. When someone takes an antihistamine like Zyrtec, it's not going to have any effect on this. These are when you take a H2 blocker. Years ago, they still have something called Pepsid, Tagamet. They were agents that were used to control people with indigestion. Prilosec, which you can get over the counter easily, is a proton pump blocker. It blocks the activity here of the parietal cells. So they're both useful in the stomach. The big player is gastrin. Gastrin is what's produced that activates. So it's produced by the stomach, and it basically makes a short trip and activates the stomach. Somatostatin kind of slows down growth factor because your stomach and digestive, you're designed to use insulin. So it's basically you're going to use carbohydrates and insulin-based items as opposed to growth hormone items. And this is a better diagram to give you an idea. With the hydrochloric acid is made here, but the parietal cells make the precursor to pepsin. The hydrochloric acid effectively activates the pepsin in the stomach from pepsinogen to pepsin, and more pepsin helps to activate, so it kind of is self-activating, somewhat of a positive feedback. Okay, the mucosa, again, bicarbonate rich, tight junction so it doesn't seep, damaged but repaired quickly. Things that go, when you talk about aspirin or nonsteroidal anti-inflammatories, ibuprofen, caffeine, chocolate, alcohol, they tend to break down this barrier and they are absorbed faster. So when people say, well, alcohol goes to my head, it does. And unfortunately, it does break that down. And any nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory, whether it's over-the-counter ibuprofen or over-the-counter aspirin, Tylenol is not included in that description. they can cause, long-term use causes that, gastritis. And those erosions, I disagree with this. It's, again, people who make up PowerPoints are graphic artists. Most also, if it said most stomach cancer is caused by Helicobacter pylori, I'll buy it. No one had more ulcers than I did. I never tested positive for Helicobacter pylori. Just saying. I had about a dozen of those. And the first time a gastroenterologist did a scope and looked at my stomach, he said, "Lou, you have a train wreck. It's not filled." That's Helicobacter pylori. And basically it breaks it down, holds it, delivers it in small bits to the small intestine. Infants make something with two ends called renin that breaks down milk protein. Even though we tend to shy away in infants, a lot of times we use formula that we're careful to not use too much milk-based protein. A lot of kids have to have soy-based, so whether it's, I don't know what they're doing, isomils and enfamils, things. It's a long time since I had one. Oh, so. And alcohol and aspirin get absorbed quickly there. The intrinsic factor is the only thing that and we have ways to get it there with injections, and I even have a nasal gel. So again, we make a lot of these gastric juices. They're increased by the gastrin, and I don't really get worried about all these different phases that are there, all the different reflexes that make it. So, and these are what the proton pumps that we associate with the parietal cells. What happens is basically it's an exchange. It's all back to that bicarbonate buffering system. We take some of the HCO3, the bicarbonate, and we swap it, -1 charge, for chloride. So we have an increase in bicarb in the blood leaving the stomach. It's called the alkaline tide. It kind of goes away when you get back to the lungs. And they go through the whole chapter and verse of that. Okay? I think that's it for everything. Little squirts of chyme, okay? Little 3 milliliter spurts. This would be an ounce. Spurt to the duodenum. The rest of it goes back. So it's tiny little spurts so it doesn't overwhelm it going through that valve. And that's the whole ball game with that regulates it. If we stretch it too much, overeat, irritants, toxins, vomiting is a protective reflex. So we shall stop here. I'll get back to you on Monday. I may send you some material or some screenshots of what that looks like from the ones we did at school. And hopefully I'll have everything on board with my computer next week. So thanks a lot. Appreciate the time. Sorry you had to listen to me drone on.